Chapter 284. Young master, that person looks so familiar. I seem to have seen him somewhere. Li didn't want to pay attention to the two effeminate young men, but the guy who laughed at him just now said again. He couldn't help but turn his head to look at them. They were very strange faces, and he was sure that he had never seen them before. The two young men were very handsome. Li looked at them again and then he immediately shivered. He actually felt that these two guys were good-looking just now. They were just sissies. Not only did they look like a sissy but they also talked like a sissy. He made a face at the guy who pointed at him, and continued to fight with the food in front of him. Poof! The young man who had just taken a sip of tea next to him and had not had time to swallow it saw his face. He couldn't help but spit out the tea in his mouth and hurriedly took out a handkerchief to wipe his mouth. Li, who inadvertently caught a glimpse of this scene, immediately felt a chill in his heart. Seeing a beautiful sissy wiping the corners of his mouth with a handkerchief, no matter how delicious the food was, he couldn't eat any more. Who would carry a handkerchief with them? However, what made him feel strange was how the two little submissives came together. After all, two tigers cannot live in the same mountain. How could a table accommodate two sissy? For the sake of what he had just eaten, Li decided to turn his back to them and sat next to them. Your wife is strict. You have never seen such a scene, have you? Li Xian saw Li change to a seat with a wide view, facing the dancers on the stage, and his face showed a little complacency. Li curled his lips disdainfully. When he secretly watched the Japanese bisexual, he didn't know where this guy was. It was a big scene to show his belly button. If he saw the striptease of the future, he would have a nosebleed. As if he didn't see the disdain on his face, Li Xian tempted him and said, "Anyway, you have nothing to do here. Why don't you go to the capital with me? The brothels in the capital can't be compared with here. More than half of the world's famous prostitutes are in the capital. They won't let you down. What's more, once you get there, your wife won't be able to control you anymore. You can do whatever you want." Li Xian tried to use this matter to tempt Li. He went to the capital alone and he didn't know when he would return. Without Li, when his research encountered difficulties, he might not be able to get any inspiration, and it might be put on hold indefinitely. Bah! It seemed that Li Xian's grimace had made the handsome boy next to him feel dissatisfied with Li. When he heard Li Xian talk about brothels and famous prostitutes in the capital, he secretly spat and showed an incomparably disdainful expression. Forget it. I plan to spend the rest of my life in Qingyan Prefecture. I have no intention of going to the capital. There was no point in forcing or threatening them. As the county lieutenant of this county, since he encountered this kind of thing, he couldn't just stand by and watch. However, the human feelings of this era were far from as indifferent as the future. There was no lack of heroes who would pull out their swords to help when seeing injustice. His Highness, who always had a strong sense of justice, was clearly such a hero. Scram, don't disturb this young master's mood. Li Xian's method was simple and crude. He stood in between the large man and the two people with a disdainful expression. He acted like a spoiled brat to the extreme. A few guards already followed him. If the large man made any strange movements, he would immediately be cut into pieces. The boy and the young man looked at him with eyes filled with deep gratitude. Oh, this little brother is quite handsome. The large man originally wanted to get angry, but when he saw that the person in front of him was actually a similarly handsome young master, a smile appeared on his face. Li noticed that Li Xian's expression was starting to freeze. He knew that this guy was finished. If it were him, he would have already demonstrated a whole set of 18 dragons subduing palms on this man's body. Knowing that the person in front of him was helping him out, the young man hurriedly cupped his hands towards Li Xian and said, "Thank you, young master." Step back. Li Xian's face was cold. He extended his arm and signaled the two people to step back. When he accidentally touched the young man's chest, he lightly patted it twice. He looked at him in surprise and said, "I couldn't tell, but this brother's body is quite sturdy. Young master." The boy watched as the man patted his young master's chest twice. He was speechless with his mouth wide open. As for the young man who was praised by Li Xian for having a sturdy body, he lowered his head to look at his chest. After a moment of shock, he raised his head to look at Li Xian in disbelief. His face was already completely red. Li Xian no longer cared about the young man. He turned around and looked coldly at the large man. He said indifferently, "Drag him out." These days he had accumulated a lot of resentment in his heart. It was time to vent it. At first, the large man did not understand his words. However, when his shoulders were pressed down and he could no longer use any strength, his face began to turn pale. The large man was dragged out by Li Xian's guards. Li Xian also followed. Li knew that he was angry. This man had appeared at the right time. As for the two young men, they were still standing in the same place in a daze. It was unknown if they were frightened, but they did not move at all. The situation here only attracted the attention of a small number of people. When a deafening cheer came from the scene, everyone's eyes were attracted by the dancer on the stage. Li also turned his head to take a look. He found that she had actually pulled off the light gauze covering her body, revealing two smooth jade arms. She only wore a tube top, revealing her two voluptuous breasts. From time to time, her jade legs would poke out of her skirt, causing a group of wolves to howl. So this was the erotic dance in the brothel. Li took a glance and lost interest. He planned to go out and take a look. He stood up from his seat. When he saw Yang Liuqing and another figure appear at the door, he suddenly stopped and his expression changed. Chapter 285. Master, the jadeite courtyard they mentioned just now should be here. Yang Liuqing raised his head, looked at the horizontal board above and asked tentatively, should we go in and look for it? Standing at the door, they saw a scantily dressed woman flirting on the stage, and the men below the stage were making a fool of themselves. Lu Rui frowned. How could a decent woman go to such a place? She turned her head, looked to the side and walked straight over. Seeing that she didn't correct her master just now, Yang Liuqing was secretly happy and followed her closely. A scream came from the corner not far away. Several figures surrounded the corner, and the scream was extremely shrill and tragic. After a while, Li Xin walked out from inside with a satisfied face. He stretched his muscles and felt that his whole body was extremely comfortable, and his mood immediately became much better. He let out a long sigh of relief, and when he looked up, he saw two pairs of unkind eyes. He blinked his eyes and said naturally, "What a coincidence, ladies." Li found that nothing good would happen when he met Li Xin, especially when he was dragged to the jadeite courtyard. Rui was at the door, and going out now was no different from courting death. If she caught him going to the brothel to watch erotic dances, he would have no place to hide his face in the future. He slipped away from the table with his waist bent. He couldn't go to the front door, so he quietly went around to the back. When he saw a small door, he quickly went in. Not long after, several young childs swaggered into the jadeite courtyard. A handsome, fair-faced young man shook his folding fan, glanced around the hall and shook his head. No. Another young child immediately looked at the young man in the front. Li Xian also looked confused. He pointed to a table that had been occupied by someone and said, "It's impossible. He was here just now." He looked back at the guards and asked, "You guys, did you see him go out just now?" No. The guards shook their heads. The young man weighed the folding fan in his hand and said indifferently, "Go in and look for it." The dance on the stage had obviously reached the most intense and exciting time, and the dancers' movements were more open and bold. Shameless. The handsome young man's face turned red with just one glance, and he secretly spat. When he turned around and saw that the young man's face was also a little red, his heart calmed down a lot, but he no longer dared to look at the stage. Damn it, don't tell me there's no back door in this jade courtyard? Who knew how many corridors, how many moon gates, and how many twists and turns he actually returned to the starting point? He planned to sneak over to see if Rui had left. Just as he took a step forward, he saw two handsome young masters walking out from the small door. When he took a closer look, he realized that they were not handsome young masters at all. They were Lu Rui and Yang Liuqing disguised as men. Others might not be able to recognize them easily if they changed their clothes and tied up their hair, but how could Li not recognize them after getting along with them for so long? There was still a distance to the nearest moon gate. It was definitely too late to retreat, and it was a dead end to go forward. Li wished he could use the earth burrowing technique at this time. Squeak. The door next to him opened a gap, like a strong light in the darkness. After being startled for a moment, Li stepped in without any hesitation. When the two handsome young masters looked over, there was no one in the courtyard. "Ah, who are you? Get out quickly." A panicked voice sounded in his ear, and a girl in a green shirt screamed and wanted to push him out of the door. The tigress was right outside, and only a fool would go out at this time. Of course, the girl's strength was no match for Li. She stood still and said, "Sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. I just want to hide here for a while, please." Li stopped halfway through his sentence and couldn't continue. Because in the room, other than him and the girl, there was another person. Facing him was a moon gate, and inside the moon gate was a bed. There was a large bathtub beside the bed, and a girl stood next to the bathtub. She was naked, and there were still many water droplets on her. She must have just come out of the bath. Everything was in one glance. Everything was in one glance. At this moment, Li Yi seemed to see the most perfect work of art created by the heavens. His mind was blank and he couldn't hear the servant girl's screams anymore. The sounds of the outside world also gradually disappeared. Only the figure in front of him became clearer and clearer. Have you seen enough? A cold voice came over, and there was an irrepressible anger in the voice. He was pulled back to reality by this voice. Regardless of whether he had seen enough or not, the most important thing to do at this time was to immediately turn around. Li Yi faced the door and there was a rustling sound behind him. The girl in a green shirt opposite him looked at him as if there was a flame burning in her eyes. Li Yi sighed in his heart. He had really offended her this time. I think I saw him go in just now. A clear voice came from outside the door and there was a knock on the door. Li Yi's expression changed again. Yang Liuqing knocked on the door and a moment later the door opened. A girl in a green shirt stuck her head out and asked, "Who are you people?" "Is Li inside?" Li Xian was the first to ask. The girl nodded and said, "Li is discussing painting techniques with my Mississippi. Are you friends of Li?" When Li Xian and the other two walked into the room, they saw Li Yi standing next to the table, and it seemed like he was painting. A young girl stood next to him and looked at him attentively. The two of them were dressed neatly and did not look messy at all. It did not seem like they were doing something dirty. Lu Rui's gaze swept around the room. The room was not big and it was filled with a faint fragrance. It was not bedtime yet, so it was a bit strange to put down the curtain on the moon door. However, it was normal for outsiders to enter a woman's boudoir. Look here, as long as you make a small adjustment to the proportion, the three-dimensional feeling will be greatly enhanced. When you usually paint, you have to pay attention to the changes in the proportion. Li Yi told Zheng Zumo the technique of three-dimensional painting with a serious expression. He turned around and saw Li Xian. He asked curiously, "Why are you back again?" He then looked at the two people next to Li Xian. After a moment of shock, his face showed an extremely shocked expression. "Rui, you too." The brothel keeper rushed in from outside and was stunned to see so many people in the room. She quickly recovered and walked to Zheng Zumo and said, "Zumo, get ready. It's time for you to go on stage." "Sorry, please excuse me." Zheng Zumo smiled apologetically at them and said to the girl in green, "Xiao Chui, help me entertain these guests." "Yes, miss," the girl said obediently. Zheng Zumo walked out of the room. The girl turned around and said, "Guests, why don't you wait here for a moment? Miss will be back in half an hour at most." "No need to trouble yourself." Li Yi waved his hand and turned to Li Xian. "I happened to meet Miss Zumo and discussed painting skills with her. Since Miss Zumo has something to do, let's go back." "Let's go." Li Xian waved his hand. He had just beaten up the man and vented his anger. Since there was no big news, he had no intention of staying here. "What's the hurry? Since we are here, let's watch for a while before leaving. This is my first time in a brothel. I won't have this opportunity in the future." Lu Rui looked at Li Yi with a meaningful look and said lightly, "No, it's improper for a woman to go to a brothel." Li Yi refused without even thinking about it. Bringing his sister-in-law to a brothel, what the F***ck was that? Chapter 286. It turned out that Mississippi Lu shouldn't be restricted by the demands of secular women. She wasn't asking for Li Yi's opinion when she said that she wanted to visit a brothel. She was just announcing it. With one hand behind his back and the other waving a folding fan, the temperament of an elegant young master was undoubtedly revealed. Looking at the flirtatious glances of the brothel girls, Li Yi really wanted to yell, "Are you guys blind? Changing clothes and hairstyles and you can't even recognize the gender?" In the past, he thought that it was bullshit to disguise a woman as a man in TV dramas. As long as one wasn't blind, they would be able to see it. Now, it seemed that he had wronged the scriptwriter. "Young masters, are there any girls that catch your eye? I'll arrange them for you right away." The brothel keeper ran over enthusiastically and glanced at Lu Rui and Yang Liuqing with a strange look. She said to Li Xian with a face full of smiles. With her sharp eyes, how could she not see that there were actually two girls over there? However, this young master Li used to be a regular customer here. He often came to Zue Mo's concert and was generous. He left a deep impression on her after listening to the song. "Just arrange a good seat. You don't have to worry about the rest." Li Yi waved his hand and said. The brothel keeper knew the rules of this Li in front of her. She ordered someone to clean up an excellent seat on the second floor and immediately brought them over. As for the original customers, she naturally found an excuse to send them away. Seeing Li Yi glaring at him with dissatisfaction, Li Xian made an innocent expression, meaning that this matter had nothing to do with him. Not knowing what kind of tricks Mississippi Lu was going to play, Li couldn't just leave. He simply sat there openly. The brothel keeper was quite good at doing things. The position of this cubicle was very good. It had a wide field of view and could see the whole stage. There were many cubicles like this. The outside was blocked by a bead curtain, so the situation inside couldn't be seen clearly. However, the stage could be seen clearly from the inside. Li Xian casually sat on the chair and crossed his legs, looking very relaxed and content. Yang Luqing had never been to a brothel before, so she was very curious about everything here. Occasionally, she would see women nestled in the arms of those men in the cubicles on the opposite side, and when they were being groped by those men, her face would turn red and she would not look anymore. Lu Rui seemed to be addicted to playing the role of a handsome young master. He waved his folding fan in his hand and looked down through the bead curtain with great interest. Ever since the woman in the room came out, the crowd seemed to be boiling. It was obvious that she was quite famous. Lu Rui looked back at Li Yi and saw that he was sitting on the chair, staring blankly. Li Yi was indeed. The scene just now was his eyes. Li that out, and couldn't be away. He glanced at the figure below, and the feeling in his heart was a little complicated. Although she had appraised a lot of erotic films in her previous life, it was the first time in both of her lives that she had seen such a scene with her own eyes. Even though she had put on her clothes now, the scene in the room just now still appeared in her mind. Listening to Miss Xuemo play the zither is simply a great enjoyment in life. Although Miss Xuemo is proficient in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting, the most amazing thing is her painting skills. Many people want to have a painting, and Miss Xuemo never shows her paintings to others easily. Although it is impossible for her to get the first place in the top 10 courtesans this time, there will definitely be a place for her. Although he couldn't see the specific situation in the surrounding cubicles, the sound could be heard. Li took a deep breath, picked up the tea on the table and took a sip, forcing the scene just now out of his mind. The woman could forget this matter very quickly as if nothing had happened and he was not petty. Li didn't know that in the gauze tent, Tseng expression was calm, but the slight rise and fall of her chest and crimson neck showed that her heart was not as calm as Li Yi thought. It was nothing more than being born in such an environment. She had long been used to hiding her emotions. On the surface, nothing could be seen, but the waves in her heart could not be suppressed. Although she was in a brothel, she had been raised as a chaste person since she was a child, and all the people who taught her were women. She had never been seen by a man. He thought that she would be extremely angry, but the strange thing was that at that time, apart from embarrassment and annoyance, there was no anger. She even helped him put on that show. Now that he thought about it, he seemed to be a little too calm at that time. She was already very proficient in zither skills. Although it was not superb, it could be said that she had reached a high level. However, when her heart was in a mess, the sound of the zither was naturally messed up. In a short period of time she had played wrong several times. Although she had covered it up very well, for those who were proficient in music theory, it was impossible to hide it. Strange, what's wrong with Miss Zimo today? She has played wrong several times. Yes, is the person playing the guqin really Lady Xuemo? What? Wrong? Don't talk nonsense if you don't understand. I think Miss Zimo plays very well. There was a commotion in the hall. Tseng Zimo took a deep breath, calmed down and wanted to play in peace. However, the more she wanted to calm down, the more irritated she felt. Even those who didn't know anything about music could hear some clues. Is this really Miss Zimo? Could it be that the rumors about her zither skills are all false? Indeed, the level that she has shown today is really inconsistent with the rumors. If this matter were to spread out, it would be hard to say if she would be able to obtain the title of top courtesan. The others are all trying their best to build up their reputation. Among them, Lu Yi and Lu Xiaoqiao are the most popular. Lu Yi was raised up by the Su family. If they throw out enough money, they might be able to become the champion. Lu Xiaoqiao had always been very close to those scholars. Once Yang Yinzhou's poem was sent out, it attracted many scholars to follow suit. So many scholars were willing to support her. I heard that even the #1 scholar of Qingyan Prefecture, Li Yi, who replaced Yang Yinzhou a few days ago, was also interested in Lu Xiaoqiao. He planned to give her a poem during the competition for the top courtesan. Lu Yi probably couldn't compete with her. Miss Zimo doesn't compete at all and has rejected so many scholars. This has already made them very dissatisfied. They will definitely not support her like last year. If she is kicked out of the top 10 courtesans this year, it will be fun. Without the reputation of the top courtesan, it is only a matter of time before she falls into the mundane world. Perhaps you and I will also have the chance to get intimate and spend the night with a beauty? Li Xian looked at Li Yi with some surprise and asked, You plan to give Lu Xiaoqiao a poem to help her become the top courtesan. I don't even know what Lu Xiaoqiao looks like. Why would I give her a poem? Li was also confused. He didn't know where this rumor came from. Hype, pure hype. I think so too. If you give Lu Xiaoqiao a poem, I'm afraid there will be many heartbroken girls in Qing and Prefecture. Those who want to become the top courtesan will definitely fight you to the death. Li Xian nodded and said. Although many aspects were considered in the competition for the top courtesan every year, those scholars played a decisive role. There was nothing better than a widely spread poem to make them famous. Qiao 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 dances with a soft waist. Zhang Tai Lu Zhao Yang Yen. Yi has been able to sing and dance since she was young. Her actions and expressions are all like those of Chu. Miao Miao holds a wooden board and a cluster of flowers and pearls, singing a new voice. If a scholar wrote such a poem for them and the poem spread, their fame would definitely soar. If these words were written by the #1 scholar of Qing and Prefecture, the effect would be even better. When the poem was spread by word of mouth, no matter how unknown Xiao Qiao, Yi, and Miao Miao were before, they would be known by countless people overnight. Although this #1 scholar was so low-key that many people had even forgotten his name, Li Xian could be sure that if he wrote a poem for a girl, the position of the top courtesan would not be contested by others. They would just go and do what they were supposed to do. Chapter 287. There's something wrong with Zimo today. Behind the stage, the procuress of the Jade Courtyard frowned and murmured as she listened to the music. When she was young, she was also the most beautiful girl for a time. She dabbled in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Although she had never touched those things after changing professions, she still had the ability to appreciate them. There was something wrong with the music today. A woman with phoenix eyes next to the procuress waved a round fan in her hand. She glanced down and said, "Who knows? She's the top girl in the courtyard. Even if her zither skills are a little worse, it doesn't matter. There are still so many stinky men who are willing to support her." "Not necessarily." Another woman in a pink gauze dress with a sharp chin said, "Young Master Qin is supporting Lu Xiaoqiao this year. I heard that he has written a lot of poems for her. Young Master Zhu just spent 500 taels of silver on Lu Yi early in the morning. As for young Master Xiao," he glanced at the woman with phoenix eyes and said in a strange tone, "Touch your conscience and tell me how many times he has asked to see you this month. Don't think that I don't know what the two of you have been doing in the room. Is it my fault that young Master Xiao likes me?" The woman with phoenix eyes rolled her eyes at her, but her tone was full of schadenfreude. The young Master Qin, young Master Zhu, and young Master Xiao they mentioned were all people who strongly supported Zheng Zimo last year. Without their support, she might not have a place among the top 10 beauties last year. However, during this time, no one knew what had gotten into her. She hid in her room all day, writing and painting. She never saw guests and even refused the invitation of these three young masters. Being humiliated, the three of them were naturally dissatisfied. In this day and age, who didn't support was the same. Without Zheng Zimo, there was still Zhang Zimo and Li Zimo. Why should they think too much? What did you just say? What happened to young Master Qin, young Master Zhu, and young Master Xiao? Tell me clearly. The procuress' face changed and asked hurriedly. What else can it be? Zueimo doesn't want to see them, and they have already turned to support someone else. Mom, if you want to support another top beauty, you have to put in more effort. The woman with a sharp chin said in a weird tone. Get lost, both of you. You traitors. You don't want to see me do well, do you? If the Jadefield courtyard collapses, the two of you will have nothing to eat in the future. An angry expression appeared on the madam's face. She raised her hand and viciously slapped the two of them on the back a few times. The two of them screamed and ran away. When the madam looked at the figure playing the zither below again, her expression began to fluctuate. Drunk Ink was the star of the Jadeite courtyard and her money tree. At least 30% of the guests who came to the Jadeite courtyard came for her. Every brothel would have such a pillar. As long as the pillar did not fall, the business of the brothel would always be prosperous. The reason that the Jadeite courtyard could occupy a place among so many brothels in Qing and Prefecture was because one of the top 10 top beauties was here. She was their signature. No matter how good the other girls were, this signature was indispensable. Without this signature, they would immediately become a second-rate brothel. Young Master Qin was an outstanding talent among the talents and had great influence. Young Master Zhu was rich and never stingy with money. Young Master Zhao's father was a judge. If two of the three of them were willing to support her, the position of top beauty would be very secure. She thought that the three young masters would continue to support Drunk Ink, but the procuress' face darkened. Her eyes began to flicker as she looked down the stage. You don't plan to support Miss Drunk Inc.? Hearing the discussions around him, Li Xian turned to look at Li Yi and asked. Forget it. It's better not to get involved in these things. Li Yi shook his head. Every time he threw out a poem, there would be a lot of trouble. He didn't want to get involved in the selection of top beauty. As long as you don't regret it. From the looks of it, Miss Drunk Inc.'s position as top beauty this year is uncertain. But this isn't a bad thing. If she really isn't the top beauty, her value will definitely plummet. If you want to take her back as a concubine, you can save a lot of money. But you have to do this as soon as possible because there will be a lot of people eyeing her. Li Xian still thought that there was an unknown affair between Li Yi and Zheng Zumo, so he kindly reminded him. If you have time to worry about whether I can get a concubine or not, you should think more about your princess. Li Yi said impatiently. Li Xian's expression immediately turned bitter. He wasn't interested in playing with Mississippi Lu anymore. He stood up from the chair, walked to Lu Rui and said, If you've seen enough, let's go. Rui flicked his wrist, put away the folding fan, threw it on the table and followed Li Yi out. Yang Liuqing naturally followed. Zheng Zumo walked over with the guqin in her arms and happened to meet Li Yi who had walked out of the compartment. She nodded slightly and then walked straight over. Many people in the hall were whispering. Strange, there doesn't seem to be many people supporting Miss Drunk Inc. this year. She never accepts other people's invitations. Could it be that she has no intention of competing for the top beauty? Yes, Lu Xiaoqiao and Lu Yi have been attending banquets frequently these days. They can't wait to rope in all the rich merchants and talents of Qing and Prefecture. Even if others didn't make such big moves, they wouldn't be like Miss Drunk Inc., not even seeing guests. Could it be that she really doesn't want to compete for the top beauty? That's not necessarily a bad thing. Everyone's eyes are on those top courtesans, so it's not easy to make a move. If she's not a top courtesan anymore, she'll just be an ordinary prostitute who can be combed with some money. Maybe we can have a taste of her. Walking out of the jade courtyard, a gust of cold wind blew in his face, and he became much more sober. Another two people came out. The handsome young man who had just been teased by the big man glared at Li Yi and ran away with the young man. Li Yi was stunned for a moment. He looked back at Lu Rui and Yang Liuqing who had come out, and seemed to understand something. Looking again at Li Xian who swaggered out of the jade courtyard and pretended to be a playboy, he shook his head and didn't say anything more. The next day, Li Yi saw a large group of people from King Ning Mansion on the street. The leader of Li Xian's guards rode on a horse and walked at the front of the group. The group quickly went out of the city gate. This guy finally left. Li Yi actually felt lonely for no reason. There was no one to discuss with him how to fly in the sky. More importantly, the dog meat hot pot was really delicious. Yang Liuqing would still report on time every day. Although Mississippi Lu still didn't agree to be her master, when she was in a good mood, she would give her a few pointers. From then on, the courtyard would often be filled with whistling sword aura, and it was impossible to bask in the sun peacefully anymore. Uncle Master, there are more invitations. Yang Liuqing walked in from outside and handed something to Li Yi. Recently, he had mysteriously received a lot of invitations. Lu Xiaoqiao, Lu Yi, and a few others he had never heard of invited him to all kinds of banquets. Li Yi always threw them to the side, and now he had accumulated a thick stack of invitations. This time, it was embroidered on a handkerchief. A trace of disappointment flashed across his eyes when he saw the signature, and he shook his head. Miss Ryun of Ichuan Brothel had asked him to compose a poem for her, and the reward was 500 taels. That girl was quite rich. He casually threw the handkerchief to the side. He didn't know how they had found out about his family, but in order to compete for the title of courtesan for a poem, they were willing to do anything. Some gave him silver, some gave him paintings, some gave him antiques, and there were even some who hinted that they could have a night with him. There were also people who tried to save the country in a roundabout way. Even Rui had received many invitations. Chapter 288. Since there are so many invitations, if you have time, it's not a problem for you to attend a few of them. Rui put away the handkerchief and looked at him as she spoke. She had also received many invitations these days, some private and some public. They were extremely polite and vaguely mentioned that they hoped she would bring her husband along. At first, she would tactfully refuse, but after seeing more of them, she was too lazy to pay attention to them. At this moment, she felt that although her husband never attended such banquets, it was necessary to socialize in life. Otherwise, he would offend many people. Her husband didn't have many friends to begin with. After Li Xian and that arrestor Li left, he spent most of his time alone. I won't go. Li Yi's answer was very straightforward. I'm afraid my wife doesn't know who they are. Their purpose is not pure and it will be troublesome if you go. Of course, Li knew what their purpose was. It was nothing more than using him to create hype. The competition for the courtesan belle was the most intense. Everyone wanted to have more bargaining chips in their hands. If one person attended an invitation, there would definitely be a second or third person. It was rare for him to have a few days of leisure, so he didn't want to get involved in this quagmire again. Those who should have appeared did not appear and a lot of insignificant people appeared. So Lu Rui didn't say anything more. She received 2 more invitations this morning. Since her husband didn't want to go, there was no point in keeping the ox. She might as well get rid of it together. The most direct impact of the courtesan belle competition on Li Yi was that he had much less time to slack off than usual. Before the courtesan belle was selected during the Lantern Festival, there was no curfew in Qing and Prefectural City. The bailiffs also had to go out to patrol at night. Although the county magistrate didn't have to do everything by himself, he still had to sit in the county government at critical times. It was one thing that no one cared about him, but there was a limit to his slacking off. Driven by the festival and the top courtesan competition, the business of the theater was booming day by day. Oldman's son didn't take the opportunity to expand his business. Instead, he took a steady approach and managed several theaters in an orderly manner. He also arranged for the orphans to work in the theaters, such as making tea, pouring water, and wiping the tables. The older children in their early teens could still do the work. Since then, the flying female thief in the prefectural city had disappeared without a trace. When he walked back to the county government, several constables on duty were squatting in the duty room and chatting. The city gets more and more lively every day. It's so tiring to patrol from morning till night. It's so tiring, someone complained. Why are you so stubborn? You've been patrolling for a whole day. All you see are trivial things. You can't stop. You can just find a brothel and watch a performance. When it is time, you can just come back and report. I have to say, the performances in the brothels these days are not bad. Those girls are trying their best to fight for the title of top beauty. They are even using their best skills. Yesterday, I saw a girl whose body was so soft that she could put her head on her butt. That's nothing. Guess who I saw when I went to the jadeite courtyard to see my lover a few days ago? The county lieutenant. I saw the county lieutenant enter a room. I asked my lover later. Guess whose room it was? Oh. When it came to the county lieutenant's gossip, the people were obviously interested and asked one after another. You'll never guess. It was actually, Li couldn't let this guy go on. He walked behind the guy who just spoke and asked, "Aren't you afraid that the county lieutenant will know that you visited a brothel while patrolling?" The bailiff was talking about the county lieutenant's gossip and was in high spirits. He casually added, "Hee, the county lieutenant won't be able to see it. It's not a big deal to be lazy. Speaking of laziness, who can compare with the county lieutenant? Let me tell you, you'll never guess whose room the county lieutenant went to that night in the jadeite courtyard. You'll be scared to death if I tell you." Halfway through his words, he finally felt something was wrong. The brother in front of him was winking at him. His heart sank. When he was about to turn his head, he was kicked on his buttocks. The constable who was kicked by Li Yi lay on the ground like a dog eating mud. He did not dare to be angry. He scratched his head and smiled awkwardly as he got up. "Sir, why did you come at this time?" Li Yi snorted and said, "If I didn't come, how would I know that you would be so bold to visit a brothel while patrolling? By the way, what did you want to say just now? Go on, I'm listening." Nothing. The bailiff had long known the county lieutenant's temper. As long as it didn't violate the principle, the county lieutenant wouldn't blame them. He said with a smile, "Sir, you may not know this. These days, because of the top beauty competition, the brothel is the most crowded place. It needs to be patrolled the most. We don't relax outside either. There are always people watching on the street. Since you all have nothing to do, go out and patrol. Whoever dares to go to the brothel will be sent to the detention room for 3 days." Li Yi waved his hand and said impatiently. The crowd dispersed in a hubbub as if they had been granted amnesty. The detention room was not a place for people to stay. 3 days were enough to kill them. With the county lieutenant's words, no one dared to go to the brothel in the future. There was once a felon who refused to confess the hiding place of the murder weapon. The county lieutenant just let him stay in the detention room alone for 5 days. When he was released, the 8-foot-tall man cried like a child. As soon as he was released, he trembled and confessed. From then on, people regarded detention as the cruelest punishment. As soon as they stepped out of the door, someone immediately turned to ask the bailiff who just spoke, Go on, whose room did the county lieutenant enter?" "Sister Ruoqing," Please persuade my Mississippi. In the room, the green-shirt girl grabbed Ruoqing's arm and said with a bitter face. Miss refused those childs and didn't attend the banquet. Mother doesn't care about her anymore. She has been promoting xianxia these days. If Miss can't get the top beauty, what should we do? The courtesan bell was a natural protective barrier. Without this barrier, the Miss would soon lose her chastity. A has-been courtesan bell. At that time, the life of the master and the servant would definitely be very difficult. Everyone else was trying their best to build momentum for the top beauty, but her Miss was doing the opposite. As a servant, she was already very anxious. Wan Ruoqing patted Xiao Chui's hand and raised her head. She looked at the woman who was sitting there and doing her makeup with some confusion. She asked, "Drunk Imo, have you really thought it through and decided not to fight for the top beauty?" The woman took off a golden hairpin with pearls and jade hanging from it and placed it in a brocade box. She casually inserted a wooden hairpin into it and carefully closed the brocade box. She walked to Wan Ruoqing's side and took her hand. She said, "Sister Ruoqing, how about I work for you in the future? Anyway, when you guys perform, you won't be able to find anyone else to paint the background. Do you think I can be your personal painter? The background you paint is so lifelike. In the entire Qingyan prefecture, no one can do it better than you," Wan Ruoqing said with a smile. Then she seemed to realize something and looked at him in surprise. She asked, "Are you planning to, no one can do it better than me?" Zheng Zumo didn't seem to hear the second half of her sentence. She said, "Sister Ruoqing, you forgot about that person?" When she said, "that person," although she gritted her teeth, her pretty face was covered with a layer of pink for no reason. Chapter 289. During this time there are people patrolling outside day and night. The security in the city is very good and there are no major cases. Lu Yi was reporting to Li Yi at a tea stall on the street. A floating corpse appeared in the river outside the Zhang family village, and its identity has not been identified yet. There have been no missing people in our county recently, and we have sent people to investigate every village. At another table a few steps away, 3 men were also talking and laughing loudly. Have you watched the top beauty competition these days? Miss Xiao Xiao and Miss Yi are competing fiercely. I'm afraid one of them will be the champion this year. In fact, there is nothing exciting about this competition. Last year's top 10 beauties will still occupy more than half of the seats this year. Moreover, no matter who is selected, we can only watch and can't touch them. That's not necessarily true. As long as there is either talent or wealth, even if it is the champion, there is still a chance to make love. Moreover, we can't touch the top beauty this year even if we can't touch the past. I don't know why the Jade Yard has been promoting Chen Miao this year, and the Phoenix Perching Building has promoted a newcomer. You should know that Zheng Zumo and Gu Xiaowan were both candidates for the top 10 beauties last year, and I'm afraid they have no hope of being on the list this year. I wonder what the former top beauty tastes like. As the 3 men talked, they showed a smile that all men understood. Later, no one knew what they were talking about, but their smiles became lascivious and their voices became lower. Your Excellency, Your Excellency. Lu Yi said a lot and found that the county lieutenant did not respond. When he looked up, he found that there was no expression on his face, and his eyes were wandering, obviously absent-minded. He stretched out his hand and waved in front of Lu Yi's eyes. Well, what's wrong? Li Yi came to his senses and asked, looking at him with confusion in his eyes. Lu Yi sighed in his heart. The county lieutenant had something on his mind, so what he said just now was in vain. As a subordinate, he should share the burden of his superior, so he changed the topic and said, "There is nothing important in the county government recently, but with the top beauty competition going on, the city will be more and more lively at night. I think we should double the number of people." Well, do as you said, and the others will be selected from the people. Li Yi clapped his hands, looked at the 3 men who were talking enthusiastically, and turned to walk to the street. "Sir, be careful." Just as they reached the street, Lu Yishui suddenly shouted and grabbed Li Yi's arm, causing Li Yi to stumble. Lu Yishui had already stood up and pointed his saber in front of him. He said sternly, "Who are you? Quickly dismount from your horse. Horses are not allowed in the city. Those who violate this rule will be punished with 30 strokes of the cane." The sound of a horse's neigh came from the front. The young knight on the horse pulled the reins. The horse raised its front hooves, stirring up a cloud of dust, and quickly stopped. Li Yi frowned slightly. Places like prefectural cities were crowded with people and never allowed horses to gallop. This person's behavior just now was worthy of being brought back and beaten 30 times with a rod. If he hadn't been thinking about something just now, he wouldn't have missed it even though they were so close. You're a constable here. Great, take me to the Anshi County government immediately. The rider didn't seem to care about what Louis Chang had just said. Seeing Louis Chang's clothes, he immediately raised his head and said arrogantly, "If you don't dismount from your horse, then go to the Anshi County government lying down." Li looked at him and said coldly. Even Li Xian didn't dare to let his horse run wild on the streets. Could this ignorant fellow have a more powerful background than Li Xian in Qingyan Prefecture? Who do you think you are? Seeing that a weak scholar dared to threaten him, a trace of anger flashed across the rider's face. He raised the horsewhip in his hand and lashed it directly at Li Yi. "How dare you!" Lu Yishui shouted angrily and slashed at the horsewhip with his saber. This fellow actually dared to attack the magistrate. The magistrate was appointed by the current emperor and could be considered as an official of the imperial court. Even if this fellow was killed, he wouldn't have to bear the consequences. The rider acted quickly, but Lu Yishui was still a beat slower. However, just when the whip was about to hit Li Yi snorted coldly and stretched out his right hand to grab the head of the whip. With a sudden tug, the rider was forcefully pulled down from the horse. Before he could get up from the ground, Li Yi kicked his waist. The rider struggled for a while and felt that he had no strength in his body. He couldn't even speak. At this moment he no longer had the arrogance he had just now. His face was full of horror. Letting a horse loose in the city with the intention of harming an official of the imperial court. Bring him back to the county government and give him 80 strokes of the cane. Take him back to the county government and give him 80 strokes of the cane. Li Yi said indifferently. Two constables ran over from a distance and immediately lifted the rider up. Just now he had used a secret skill taught by Rui. Within an hour this embroidered pillow wouldn't be able to exert any strength at all. Although Li Yi was not a master, he had been trained by the two peerless masters in his family. It was easy for him to deal with such an embroidered pillow. Yes. Lu Yishui cupped his hands and answered. He was very shocked by the county magistrate's skills. After Li Yi left, he looked at the rider ferociously. Take him back. Just now he had exercised a little on the street, which was a small interlude. The authority of arrestor Emingzu was still there. Even if the son of the magistrate made a mistake, the constables of Anshi County would arrest him without any fault. No matter how powerful the background of the offender was, once he entered the county government, he would only be dealt with according to the law. Even if the offender really had a powerful background, the constables wouldn't dare to make trouble for him. Otherwise it would only cause more trouble. Of course, the magistrate didn't have a son. Therefore, Lu Yishui and the others wouldn't feel any psychological pressure when they beat the guy with a stick. When he returned home and walked into the courtyard, he saw Rui throwing a stack of paper into the stove. When she saw Li Yi coming in, she smiled and said, "I received a few more invitations this morning. I figured that you wouldn't go, so I burned them all." Li Yi nodded. When he walked to the door, he seemed to have thought of something and paused. He turned around and asked, "The invitations this morning? Oh, who are they from?" Lu Rui was stunned. She thought for a moment and said, "Lu Xiao from Yichuan brothel sent another one. Lu Yi sent 2 and 500 taels of silver, but they were returned by me. In addition, Gu Xiaowan from Perching Phoenix brothel and Jadeite courtyard." Li Yi's eyes lit up. "Chen Miao Miao from Jadeite courtyard invites you to a banquet tonight." Lu Rui thought that he had changed his mind. She said apologetically, "I didn't know what you were planning. I shouldn't have come so early. It's fine. So be it." Li Yi smiled. A trace of disappointment appeared in his eyes as he walked into the room. Women's minds are so hard to guess. He paced around the room a few times and sighed. He walked to the desk and began to grind the ink. "Young master, let me do it." Xuanhuan stood at the door and looked in. She immediately ran over and took the ink stick from Li Yi's hands. Yang Liuqing had almost finished all the work in the house these days. If she saw this, she would definitely fight with her for this. She loved watching the young master write and paint. Whether it was in the past or in the future, this position could only be hers, the servant girl thought to herself. Chapter 290. In the government office of Anshi County, the bailiffs watched the cane falling on the buttocks of the young knight with a strange look in their eyes. Half of the 80 strikes had been done. Besides twitching unconsciously because of the pain, the knight didn't make any sound from the beginning to the end. Although they didn't intend to kill him and chose the fleshy part of his buttocks, he would be able to jump around again after lying in bed for 10 days or half a month after the 80 strikes. However, the pain from the strike of the cane was real. Gradually, the bailiff's gazes on the knight turned solemn. This man was a man. Even Louis Zhang's eyes changed. When they were on the street just now, he thought that the knight was just a playboy who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. He didn't expect that the knight was also a tough man. Let me do it. In order to show enough respect for this man, Louis Zhang decided to do it himself. He walked over and took the cane from a bailiff. He's a good man. With a sigh of admiration, he raised the stick high and then brought it down. Ah! A heart-wrenching sound suddenly sounded. The knight found that he could finally make a sound, and his body seemed to have regained its freedom. Snot mixed with tears rolled down from his face, and he screamed like a pig being slaughtered. The admiration on the bailiff's faces froze. Continue? Louis Zhang was annoyed. He thought that the knight was a tough man, but he didn't expect that the knight was also a coward. He waved his hand and said, "The Lord said 80 strikes, so it can only be 80 strikes. No more or less." Whoosh! More than 10 people rushed into the hall. When the first person saw the young knight lying on the bench, he changed his face and said, "Stop." County Magistrate Liu came in with an old man and asked with a frown, "What's going on?" Louis Zhang cupped his hands and said, "Your Excellency, this man rode his horse recklessly on the street and tried to attack the county magistrate. According to the law, he should be beaten 80 times. He has already been beaten 60 times. Rode his horse on the street and attacked County Magistrate Li?" County Magistrate Liu glanced at the young knight and said lightly, "Then continue to beat him. We'll talk after that." Seeing County Magistrate Liu's attitude, Louis knew that County Magistrate Liu's background might not be so powerful. After responding, he turned around and said to the yamen runner, "Continue." The man who looked like a guard was about to speak, but the old man beside County Magistrate Liu waved his hand and said, "Since he has made a mistake, he should be punished." Then he looked at County Magistrate Liu and said with a smile, "About the matter I just mentioned, Registrar Zheng is not here. Louis, take this old man to the household," County Magistrate Liu said. "Thank you, Lord Liu." The old man cupped his hands and said. Louis nodded. Half of the people that the old man brought stayed here while the other half followed Louis to the house. The household register was where the household register was kept. When they reached the door, Louis Zhang turned around and said, "Only 2 people can enter. The rest of you can wait outside." "Li Jing, come in with me, the others wait outside." The old man smiled, pointed to the man in the lead and walked in with him. Louis stood outside. Naturally, there were scribes inside to greet them. Looking at the travel-worn people standing in the yard, he felt bored and habitually used the reasoning method that the county magistrate taught him to reason. These people seemed to have traveled for a long time and were definitely not from Qinyan Prefecture. They were arrogant and dared to be so arrogant in the prefectural city, so they definitely did not come from a small place. Most likely they came from the capital. Combined with County Magistrate Liu's attitude, this possibility immediately increased to 80%. Beside the desk, the little servant girl was slowly grinding ink, but her eyes were staring at Li Yi's hand. She watched as small square characters appeared on the white paper. Although the son-in-law had taught her to read a long time ago, she could only recognize a few words on the paper, such as beauty and under the moonlight. However, it did not matter if she did not recognize them. Looking at those beautiful words appearing on the paper made her feel inexplicably comfortable. Li Bai did not have time to be born, this should not be a problem. Cao Cao actually had 3 sons, but none of them were called Cao Ji or Cao Pai. This song is so famous, but I don't have any impression of it, so there is no more. After writing for a while, Li Yi would stop and murmur a few words. In his mind, information about this world kept flashing by. After filtering, he started writing again. Xuanhuan looked strangely at the son-in-law who was talking to himself. After grinding the ink, she saw the son-in-law hammering his shoulder. She immediately ran behind him, stretched out her small hand and gently pinched it. After pinching for a while, her wrist was a little sore, so she moved a small chair and sat opposite Li Yi. She placed her hands on the table and propped her head up. She tilted her head and blinked her big eyes. Looking at the shaking pen, she let out a small yawn. Every time he was immersed in his own world in his mind, time passed especially quickly. Li Yi could not remember how many books he had flipped through. It was only when he flipped to the last page of the book that he realized his arm was very sore. The light in the room was also a little dim. He raised his head and looked out the window. The sun was about to set below the mountains in the west. He put down the brush and rubbed his shoulder, waiting for the ink on the last page to completely dry. The little servant girl had fallen asleep in front of him. One side of her pretty face was pillowed on her arm. There was still a trace of crystal at the corner of her mouth. The afterglow of the setting sun shone in through the window, causing her entire person to be immersed in the halo. He got up to take a piece of clothing and gently draped it over her body. When he walked out of the room, Sister Rui was sitting in the courtyard and talking in a low voice. Seeing Li Yi walk out, Rui stood up and said, "I saw that husband was engrossed in writing, so I did not disturb you. Dinner is ready. Husband, go wash your hands first." Li Yi nodded and was about to wash his hands when Fang walked in from outside. He looked at him and then at Rui. After hesitating for a moment, he said, "Son-in-law, there is a young lady outside the house who has been standing at the door for a while. She seems to be looking for you. I'll go out and take a look first." Li Yi said to Rui and walked out the door. These days there were indeed many people looking for him. Without exception, they were all the personal maids and attendants of so-and-so young ladies. Although he did not intend to accept the invitation, it was not very polite to let them wait there. Before he walked out of the house, he saw a young lady wearing a green dress pacing back and forth outside the door. Li Yi paused for a moment, then turned and walked back. "You?" The young lady kept pacing outside the door, not deciding whether to go find that person or not. She had come out behind the young lady's back. What if the young lady knew that she had come to find him and was unhappy? But if she did not go find him, how would she solve the young lady's problem? While she was hesitating, she saw that person walking outside. Just as she was about to summon her courage, she saw that after seeing her, he actually ran back. It was obvious that he was avoiding her. She pouted and pointed at his back, feeling wrong to the point of tears. Bad person. Lecher. Heartless. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they did not fall. The young lady endured the grievances in her heart and vented all of her resentment on the small tree by the wall. "What are you doing?" A confused voice came from the door. The young lady suddenly turned her head and saw that the bad person was standing at the door, looking at her with a surprised expression. "This is for you." Li Yi did not intend to ask about the grudge between the young lady and the tree. He walked over and handed her a thin book in his hand. The young lady's leg was in the air and there were still tears in her eyes. She stared at Li Yi in a daze, momentarily forgetting to reach out to take the book. In the Anshi County government, Lu Yi leaned against the door of the household office with a tree branch in his mouth. He looked into the room again in confusion. What was that old man looking for in there? He was so old, yet he was kneeling and crying inside. The scribe of the household office was scared silly. Chapter 291. I snuck out on my own. Don't tell our young miss. The girl named Xiao Chui trotted away. Seeing her back disappear at the end of the alley, the words she said before she left rang in Li Yi's ears again. "This woman, what the hell is she doing?" Li Yi rubbed his eyebrows and murmured. With her personality, it was impossible for her to give up on herself. What was the point of her inaction? It was actually Xiao Chui who sneaked over that made him realize that Zheng Zimo's situation had reached such a point. Was it because she was thin-skinned? However, regardless of whether what happened that night happened or not, Li Yi couldn't watch her passively accept that fate. If what Li Xian said was right, with those things the problem should have been solved by now, right? But why did he still feel irritable for no reason? "Young master, it's time to eat?" Xuanhuan's voice faintly came from inside. Li Yi temporarily suppressed the chaotic thoughts in his heart, turned around and walked back. The girl named Xiao Chui held the book tightly in her arms and ran out of the alley. The crowd on the street began to thicken. She slowed down and carefully took the book out of her arms. She flipped through a few pages and saw the dense handwriting on it. A smile immediately appeared on her pretty face. "It seems that bad guy isn't that bad after all," she murmured to herself, bought a stick of tanghulu on the street and skipped forward. She had been with the young miss since she was a child. Although the young miss knew nothing about zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting, at least she learned words and poems from the young miss. That bad guy was no longer a bad guy. That young master's poems were amazing. Last time in that garden he scared so many people. I also heard that those who wanted to compete for the top courtesan cried and begged him to write poems for them. Last time, when her mother gave Qin Miao Miao 500 taels of silver and asked her to find that young master, she heard everything. What right did she, Qin Miao Miao, have to make that young master write a poem? She hadn't even ascended to become a phoenix yet. Recently she had been saying those weird things in front of young Mississippi. If it wasn't for young Miss stopping her, she would have torn her mouth apart. Wasn't it just because her mother wanted to make her a top courtesan? She wasn't as pretty as Miss and her talent was far from Mrs. More importantly, had she ever let that young master see her body? You can't compare to Miss in anything, and you still want to be the courtesan queen? Dream on. There were also those people who begged him to write poems but they couldn't. She hadn't even opened her mouth today, but she had already gotten what they dreamed of. It could be seen that the young master still cared about her miss. Thinking of this, Xiao Chui's heart was even happier. She sneaked into the jade courtyard from the back door. Miss had just gone out to look for Sister Ruoqing, so she had a chance to sneak out. She gently pushed the door open and heard a familiar voice. Xiao Chui, where did you go? She hurriedly hid the things in her arms. If Miss found out, she would definitely ask her to return them. She grinned, revealing 2 rows of white teeth, and said, Miss, I just went out to buy 2 skewers of candied haws. I'll give you one. The sky was already completely dark. Finally, there was movement from inside. Louis Zhang spat out the dried twig in his mouth and saw the old man and the young man walking out of the house. Sorry for the trouble. The old man cupped his hands and said, Old man, did you find what you wanted? Louis Zhang asked curiously. Louis Zhang guessed that seeing how sad the old man was, he must have found what he wanted. Moreover, the result didn't seem to be very satisfactory. The old man didn't directly answer. Instead, he smiled and asked, Dare I ask this constable, is all the household registration of this county in here? Is there any missing? I can't say that all the household registration is here, but there shouldn't be much difference. Louis Zhang replied. Some time ago, he had brought his brothers to check the population of each village. Except for those who hid in the mountains, the household registration of each village would be the same as the number of people. There shouldn't be any difference. Thank you. The old man smiled kindly. He pointed at the young man who was beaten today and was being supported by 2 guards. He said to Louis Zhang, I didn't discipline my subordinates well. He has just arrived at your mansion and has already made such a big mistake. I don't know. Louis Zhang waved his hand and said, Since you have already punished him, you can take him away. Just remember not to ride the horse in the town. County Magistrate Liu obviously didn't want to have a deep grudge with these people. He had specially told Louis Zhang these things during the day. He believed that the county lieutenant wouldn't say anything. Seeing this group of people leaving the county government, Louis Zhang stretched his body. It was time for him to go out and patrol. Otherwise, his subordinates would definitely take the opportunity to be lazy. He stretched his back and felt a little less tired. Fortunately, there were only a few days left before the upper era. After the upper era, there would be a curfew in the town again. He wouldn't have to suffer at night anymore. Uncle Li, are we going to the village now? The old man walked out of the county government with more than 10 guards. The man called Li Jing turned his head and asked. The old man called Uncle Li looked up at the sky and said, Let's find an inn to stay in first. We'll talk about it tomorrow morning. He turned his head and looked at the tall gate of the county government again. His face showed a strong sadness that couldn't be melted. Early the next morning, a group of people led horses out of the town. More than 10 guards quickly got on the horses. One horse pulled the carriage and galloped in a certain direction. An hour later, a group of strange guests came to the Li family village. It was strange, but it was because these people were all riding tall horses, and they looked travel-worn as if they had traveled for a long time. Outsiders came to this remote and desolate place, and most of them were poor relatives of some family in the village. When had there ever been such a scene? What brings you to the Li family village? Seeing these people get off the horses, the old man of the Li family village walked over and asked with cupped hands. He secretly winked at the Dezhuang brothers who were not far away. When they didn't know the purpose of these outsiders, it was always good to be vigilant. Old brother, this is the Li family village, right? Looking at the kind old man in front of him, who didn't seem to be looking for trouble, the village head was slightly relieved and said, This is the Li family village. Old brother, do you know Li Minghan? Li Minghan? So they are here to find someone. The village head murmured this name. He had some impression of this name, but he couldn't think of it at the moment. The people in the village were all uneducated boorish people. Their names were Dezhuang, Ergo, Sanpao and so on. Li Minghan, such an elegant name, didn't seem like something the villagers could come up with. At this moment, another old villager murmured, Li Minghan, is this the name of Li Xiaotsai? The village head slapped his forehead and suddenly realized something. How could I forget about Li Xiaotsai? He turned his head to look at the old man and said, Yes, there was such a person in the village. He moved here with his wife 20 years ago and later settled down in the village. He was the only Xiaotsai in the village, but he has been dead for many years. Is he the one you are looking for? 20 years ago, yes. Hearing the village head's description, 2 lines of turbid old tears fell from the old man's eyes. He choked and said, Young master, I'm late. Chapter 292. Young master, this old servant should have stopped you back then. Beside a lone grave at the end of the Li family village, a dozen or so figures stood solemnly. The old man with the surname Li stroked the cold and rough tombstone, his expression sorrowful and full of self-blame. Not far behind the crowd, the villagers of the Li family village gathered in groups of twos and threes, discussing in low voices. Are these nobles really here to see Scholar Li? That old man called himself, this old servant. Could it be that Scholar Li was also from a wealthy family? Do you even need to ask? If he wasn't from a wealthy family, how could he have so many attendants on horseback and armed with swords? The first time I saw Scholar Li, I knew he wasn't an ordinary person. Of course, my second son was working in a tailor's shop at that time. He said that the clothes on Scholar Li were enough for us to eat for several years. And that lady from the Li family, she was so pretty and well-mannered, but what a pity. The villagers spoke one after another, fully unleashing their imaginations. Gossiping was human nature, especially for these uneducated villagers who liked to squat under the locust tree at the entrance of the village and gossip when they had nothing to do. In just a short while, several versions of Scholar Li's story had circulated. Some time ago, a brothel had been built on an empty plot of land not far from the village. The villagers who had nothing to do would sometimes go there to listen to the stories. At this time, the storytellers had mixed the stories together and created a new and moving story. The lady of the Li family was originally the daughter of a rich and powerful family. In order to resist the marriage arranged by her family, she eloped with her lover and escaped thousands of miles away. To avoid being found by her family, she lived in seclusion in such a remote mountain village. She lived a simple life with tea, rice, oil, and salt. She hid for 10 years until the couple passed away. 20 years had passed and the lady's family had declined, while the lover's family had risen day by day. Now, the lover's family had finally found traces of the couple and happily wanted to bring them back. However, they could only lament at the lonely grave. What a sad story. Of course, the story did not end here. The woman's family, who had previously suppressed the couple, did not expect that 20 years later, the young Mrs. Child would become a great person and be personally rewarded by His Majesty. In just a few years, he rose to the top and was ranked in the imperial court. When he learned of his parents' past, he flew into a rage and swore to clear the name of his parents. Yep, I'll write it like this. If I sell it to the theater, I'll be able to earn quite a bit of money. The head of the Li family sighed and patted the old man's shoulder. The world is unpredictable. My condolences, old brother. Lu was also eating the butter with a spoon. He walked over and shook his head. That's not how you eat butter. Xuanhuan raised her head and looked at him in confusion. Didn't the young master just tell him to eat it with a spoon? First, you have to wash your hands. Li raised his hands and scooped a spoonful of butter into his palm. He shook it in front of Mississippi Lu. Under her confused and curious gaze, he quickly smeared the butter on her pretty face. Because they were too close, Mississippi Lu was waiting for Li to tell her how to eat it. Before she could react, Li's figure had already disappeared from the kitchen. Haha, this is the correct way to use butter. Bang. An arrogant laughter came from outside the door. Mississippi Lu's beautiful eyes were full of anger. She bent two fingers slightly and the wooden spoon broke into two halves in her hand. Ah, second miss, your face. Xuanhuan looked at her and laughed. After Lu Rui glared at her, she immediately covered her mouth and smiled from her eyes. Li walked out of the yard in a happy mood. Considering her face, Mississippi Lu would definitely wash her face before coming out. At that time, he might have almost reached the county government office. Life should be fun like this. Occasionally, it was a good thing to let Mississippi Lu, who only knew how to make trouble for him, suffer. Humming a light tune, he couldn't help but be stunned when he walked out of the door. Uncle Li, why are you here? Li looked at the Li family's villager standing at the door and asked in confusion. Your Excellency, why did you move here? If it weren't for Arrestor Lu, I wouldn't have found this place. The villager said with a smile. There were two other people standing beside the villager. Before Li could say anything, the old man on the right suddenly became extremely excited and murmured, Yes, it must be him. He looks 70% similar to young master when he was young. His eyes are so lively. He must have taken after Miss He. The old man suddenly took a step forward and grabbed Li's arm. He looked him up and down. Because he was too excited, even his voice was trembling. What are you doing? Seeing a man grabbing his son-in-law at the door from a distance, Fang strode over and shouted harshly. Chapter 293. Li's words were stuck in his throat before he could say them out. What, young master, and Miss He? What was the old man talking about? Why couldn't he understand a single word? Hey, what are you doing? Seeing that the old man was pulling his son-in-law, Fong walked over quickly and wanted to pull him away. The young man beside the old man frowned slightly. In order to avoid affecting the touching scene of Uncle Li and the young master recognizing each other, he stepped forward and blocked in front of the big man who didn't know what to do. Bang! Fong raised his hand and slapped the guy who was blocking the way away. He found that the old man just now had let go of his son-in-law. The young man got up from the ground and rubbed his still aching chest. He looked at Fong as if he was looking at a monster. It's good that you found him. It's good that you found him. God has eyes and still left the roots for the direct descendants of the Li family. The old man's worried expression was swept away and he said with a laugh. At this time, Li Yi had faintly realized that the situation was not very good, especially when the old man grabbed his arm again and said affectionately, "Young master, I finally found you. Old man, have you mistaken me for someone else?" Li Yi looked at him and asked suspiciously. "I'm not mistaken, I can't be mistaken. Young master and young master looked too much alike when you were young. This old servant will not be mistaken. If old madam knows that young master has a child, she will definitely be very happy." The old man was so excited that his beard was trembling, and his gaze never left Li Yi's face. After 3 generations, the once glorious Li family had already declined. The younger generation only knew how to indulge in sensual pleasures and had no desire to improve. In a few decades they would probably be kicked out of the ranks of nobles. The young master was so young, but he had actually received the emperor's appreciation. After he returned, he might be able to revive the Li family and restore the Li family to its former glory. Looking at the old man's expression, Li Yi knew that it would not be easy to persuade him. He looked at the old man and said helplessly, "Uncle Li, tell this old man if I am the young master he mentioned." "Sir, there should be no mistake," said the village chief with a nod. Li Yi was stunned. He looked at the village chief and asked, "Didn't you say that my father is the only elementary scholar in the Li family village?" "Indeed." The village head nodded and explained, "Li Xiaotsai is from the Li family village, but he settled here later and wasn't born in the Li family village. There are so many people with the surname Li in the world. How can they all be born and raised in our Li family village?" The Muramesa said with a matter-of-fact expression, which made Li Yi want to slap his old face with the sole of his shoe. The old man smiled and said, "Young master, come back to the capital with us this time. It's the old madam's 60th birthday. This old servant is here to take you back, but, if the old madam sees you, she will definitely be very happy." Old Fong, who was watching from the side, was dumbfounded. What the hell was going on? Why couldn't he understand what they were saying? While Fong didn't understand, Li Yi finally understood. The Muramesa must have been fooled, or these two people had colluded to deceive him, so they made up such a story. Damn, the young master of a big family who wandered outside. Why does this story sound so familiar? Can't the plot be more melodramatic? Right, the old son used to tell these stories often, and it seems that many people have heard them. Maybe this story is the most popular one at the moment. Don't these people know how to be flexible? If he didn't guess wrong, the old man would definitely say, "Go with me, there is a huge family with countless properties waiting for me to inherit." A person with a slightly lower IQ might believe him and happily follow him on a road of no return, but in the blink of an eye, he would be sold to a rich woman on the way, especially a handsome gigolo like him. It was very likely that he would be treated as a target. This kind of clumsy trick was good for deceiving ordinary people, but it was far from being able to deceive the county lieutenant who came from the 21st century and had seen countless clever tricks of deception. If they dared to talk nonsense again, they would all be arrested and put in detention in the county office. Rui walked out from inside with a sword in his hand. The cream on his face took a long time to wash off. He decided to teach Li Yi a deep lesson. It was useless even if he hid in the county office, or he would be more insatiable in the future. Before he walked out of the door, he saw Li Yi standing at the door, so he strode out. "Go back with me." Fong closed the door. Seeing Mississippi Lu coming out, the smile on the old man's face became more obvious. When he called her young madam, Li Yi said, "Shut up," grabbed Mississippi Lu's hand and walked back, not forgetting to ask Fong to close the door. When he closed the door, he was confused for a moment. Shouldn't it be young madam? Lu Rui was taken back to the yard by Li Yi in a daze. Hearing the old man calling her young madam behind them, she only came back to her senses when he entered the room. A trace of embarrassment flashed across her pretty face. She squinted her eyes and held the hilt of her sword in her other hand tightly. This guy was getting bolder and bolder. Li Yi lay on the bed looking at the ceiling motionless. He had been in this world for half a year. His parents were dead and he was alone. His home was in Willow Leaves Village in Rui Square. Here, he had a beautiful wife, a violent sister-in-law and a well-behaved servant girl. He was the county lieutenant of Anshi, and he was in charge of dozens of subordinates. At this time, an old man came to him and told him that he was the young master of a family in the capital, and wanted him to go back to the capital. It was said that life was like a drama, but it shouldn't be the same, right? Wouldn't it be better to live a peaceful life here? If he was a county lieutenant, then so be it. It was necessary to have such a protective umbrella. Practicing martial arts, watching dramas, listening to songs in the Jade's courtyard, teasing the servant girl at home, teasing Rui, and doing some sneaky things in bed at night, he could live like this for the rest of his life. Go to the capital? Whoever wanted to go could go. He was very determined, but an inexplicable feeling of irritation became clearer, as if there was a voice in his mind. Go and see. Go and see, that is your home. This voice came from the deepest part of his body, and he could hear it clearly even if he covered his ears. As if he realized something, Li suddenly stood up from the bed and stared at his hands, shouting, "Is it you? Is it you?" He suddenly felt dizzy and his heart palpitated like never before. In the courtyard, Rui's sword chi was sharp, and in the room, Li seemed to have gone crazy. Rui stood at the door, and a trace of doubt appeared on her pretty face. She couldn't help but think, did the two of them quarrel? Although there would often be small fights, it had never been this serious. "Husband, what's wrong?" She strode over and supported Li Yi, asking with concern. Li Yi's eyes were red, and he felt as if there was a stone pressing on his chest. He panted heavily. It was the first time she saw him show such emotions. Even when he was angry with her last time, he was still abnormally calm. She didn't know how to comfort him, so she could only hold his hand tightly and said, "I don't know what happened, but husband said that no matter what we encounter, as long as we face it together, we will definitely be able to solve it, right?" Feeling the strength from her hand, Li Yi's breathing gradually calmed down, and his eyes became clear again. He took a deep breath and hugged her in his arms, saying softly, "That's right, there is nothing that can't be solved. Wait here for a while, I will be back soon." Patting her on the shoulder, he strode outside. Melodramatic plot. As he stepped out of the courtyard, he cursed in his heart. Chapter 294. The old man with the surname Li sat on a chair and took a sip of tea. He was not surprised by the young master's behavior. After all, this had happened too suddenly. Anyone else would not have believed it. The young master had grown up in the Li family village. The young master had a grudge against the family and had probably never told him about the family. His reaction was reasonable. But it didn't matter. He had evidence to prove it. He took something out of his pocket and said, "Young master, this jade pendant is the proof of identity of the Li family. Young master always carries it with him. As long as you take out the other jade pendant, we will know." Li did not remember having such a jade pendant, but it looked familiar. He looked at the old man and said, "Wait a moment." He took out a worn-out wooden box from the storage room. After opening it, he rummaged through it. The box contained the belongings of the father of the original body. When Li Yi found it under the bed in the dilapidated house, the box was still locked. If there really was something inside, it must be very important since the original owner of the body did not want to sell it under such difficult circumstances. There were not many things in the box. There was a worn-out folding fan. The fan's surface and the fan's ribs had already been separated. There was a small rattle drum, a broken red hairpin, and a jade pendant that was very similar to the one in the old man's hand. When Li Yi took out the jade pendant, the old man immediately walked over and said excitedly, "It's this one, it's this one." He put the two jade pendants together. The cross-sections were completely matched, forming a picture of a Pisces. Pisces spitting pearls. This is the Pisces spitting pearls. The old man pointed at the two jade pendants and said, "Young master, you should believe me this time, right? I'm afraid this matter is 99% true." The old man sighed and said, "Sir, you may not remember, but when you were young and saw other relatives walking around during the festival, you would ask them where they were. When Li Xiaotsai was pressed, he would punish you to memorize books outside the door. When Sir was 7 years old, it snowed really heavily. I still remember that it was New Year's Day. I heard Li Xiaotsai shouting from next door, 'You don't have a grandfather and you don't have any other relatives.' That day, Master stood in the courtyard for half the night. The next day he had a high fever and did not wake up. Li Xiaotsai carried you everywhere to find a doctor. He copied books for all the wealthy families in the city for a whole month before he could pay for the medicine he borrowed. From then on, Master never asked about his relatives again." Li Yi had no memory of the past. After hearing the village chief's words, He finally understood why his heart palpitations and irritation had come. A child's nearly 20 years of obsession had seeped deeply into his body even though his soul had died. Li rubbed his head. In the end he still did not have complete control over this body. He could feel the desire that came from his bones. He longed to return to his ancestral home and to see his other relatives in this world. They were probably the only relatives he had left. In the room next door, Lu Rui stared at the wall across from her. She had a surprised and complicated expression on her face. Lu Rui sat on a stone bench in the courtyard and occasionally turned her head to look into the room. Her beautiful eyes were shining, and no one knew what she was thinking about. The young maidservant pressed her body tightly against the door, trying hard to hear what her son-in-law was saying to the unfamiliar grandfather in the room, but she could not hear it clearly. Her little face was full of annoyance. The old man with the surname Li sighed and said, "Young master, this time please come back with me. Young master ran away from home that year, and old madam has been sad ever since. Her health has been deteriorating day by day. If she can see young master she will definitely get better." Li did not answer his question. He composed himself and raised his head to look at the old man. He slowly opened his mouth and asked, My father and mother, what happened that year? Why did they leave? Why did you only think of coming to find them now?" "This matter, it's a long story." Even if Li did not ask, the old man would have told him the truth. He let out a long sigh and a look of reminiscence appeared on his face. Although my Li family cannot be considered a rich and powerful family, it is still a noble family. When the country was founded, the old master was given the title of a county duke. However, the descendants of the Li family did not have any meritorious deeds, so the title of nobility decreased with each generation. When it came to the old master, the county duke's mansion had already become a marquis's mansion. The old master and the Qin marquis were old friends. In order to prevent the decline of the Li family after 3 generations, he wanted the young master to marry into the Qin family. The young master and the young lady of the Qin family were engaged when they were young. However, no one would have thought that the young master would fall in love with a commoner girl. Even if the old man did not say what happened next, Li could still guess the development of the plot. Prince, princess, commoner girl, one was betrothed before he was born, the other eloped for love. Since ancient times were there not many such stories? Some time ago, Li had adapted the story of Sima Xiangru and Zhuo Wenjun and sent it to the old man Sunday. Only a few days later the real truth happened to him, his father. Was there any need to say what happened next? In order to climb up a big thigh, the Li family of course could not let their young master fall in love with an ordinary woman with no background, so they prepared to break up the lovers. However, they never expected that after they raised the stick, they would find that the lovers had already flown away. In less than half a month before the day of the marriage with the young lady of the Qin family, the young master and the young master's mother eloped and left the capital. The Qin family was humiliated and furious, so they cut off all contact with the Li family. The old master fainted from anger. After he woke up, he did not allow us to look for the 2 of them. He only thought that the Li family did not have this unfilial descendant. I have searched secretly for many years and finally got the news of the young master, but, I did not have enough time. I see. Li nodded, stood up and said, "Xuanhuan, see the guests out." The next moment, the figure of the little maid appeared at the door. "Young master." The old man stood up and looked anxious. Li waved his hand and said, "You can go back. Tell them that the young master of the Li family has passed away. There is no young master and you have never seen me." Seeing him striding out, the old man was about to chase after him, but the Muramesa pulled his arm. "I watched this child grow up. You owe him too much. Give him some time." At this moment, the Muramesa was like a wise man. Actually, Li did not think that the Li family owed him anything. Even if they owed something, they owed it to his 2 parents that he had never met. He knew very well where he came from. The identity of the original owner of his body could not be said to have nothing to do with him, but really, it was not that important. The problem was that he could not get rid of the influence of the obsession in his body. He did not know if it was an illusion or if it was because of some unknown reason. He needed time to think about it. The old man with the surname Li walked to the door and cupped his hands at the 2 women in the courtyard. He said, "Young master, madam, second madam, I will leave now." Lu Rui's hand was already holding the hilt of his sword. Rui patted his hand lightly before putting it down. "Madam, second madam, goodbye." The young man called Li Zheng cupped his hands and turned to leave. "Get lost." The old man with the surname Li and the Muramesa had just walked out of the courtyard when they saw a figure fly out from inside. Chapter 295. Miss, who is that old grandpa? I've never seen him before. After hearing Rui's words and closing the door, the servant girl walked back and asked in confusion. After seeing her, the young master went back to his room without saying a word. His sullen look immediately made the servant girl have a bad impression of the old man. Rui rubbed her head and said, "The young master is thinking about something very important. Don't disturb him." "Oh." Xuanhuan replied in a low voice and quietly walked to the door. After taking a look inside, she tiptoed to the kitchen. It was getting late and it was time to cook dinner. Li lay on the bed and stared blankly at the ceiling again. The difference was that this time his mind was empty. As he stared, his eyelids became heavy, the north wind whimpered and the whole world was covered in white. "Dad, why do Li Dong and Li Bei all have grandpas? Where's my grandpa?" A young man in thin clothes stood in the courtyard and asked loudly in the heavy snow. The white snow fell on his head and shoulders. His lips were purple from the cold, but the determined expression on his face did not change at all. "You don't have a grandpa." After a long time, a hoarse voice came from the room with the flickering candlelight. "Why?" The young man shivered and his voice became louder. "I said no means no. Don't ask again." The voice in the room became stern. The young man bit his lips and his body began to tremble. He stubbornly stared at the candlelight in the room and refused to take a step forward. The snow became heavier and the wind blew on his face like knives. The young man's legs had lost all feeling. After a while, his body swayed and fell on the snow. At the same time, the door was pushed open and an anxious man ran out from the room. He picked up the young man on the snow and said hoarsely, "Dia." The young man was unconscious and his forehead was burning. The man carried the young man into the room and quickly rushed out again. He wrapped the young man in a blanket and carried him on his back. He pushed open the courtyard door and disappeared into the snowstorm against the cold wind. "Doctor, my child is sick, please open the door. Doctor, please save my child. Doctor, please save my child." On the night of Chinese New Year's Eve, the pharmacy was closed and the clinic was closed. The man knocked on the door of several clinics with the child on his back, but no one answered. Finally, just as he was about to lose all hope, the door of the last clinic slowly opened. The white-haired old doctor glanced at him, sighed and said, "Come in." When the young man woke up from his coma, he saw the man with bloodshot eyes and messy hair standing guard in front of the bed. "Father, I'm sorry. I should have been obedient," the young man said weakly. "It's not your fault, it's not your fault, it's all my fault." The man held the youth's hand, tears welling up in his eyes. "Father, I miss Mother." The man turned his head, unwilling to let the youth see the tears on his face. The young man suddenly smiled. He held his father's hand tightly and said, "Father, I won't ask that question again." The man couldn't help but cry out. Li Yi abruptly sat up from the bed, feeling a suffocating feeling in his heart. When a pure white handkerchief was extended to him, he realized that his face was already covered in tears without him noticing. Rui held one of his hands and used the other to wipe away his tears. Li looked at the sky outside and asked, "What time is it now?" "It's almost midnight." Rui looked at him and asked, "Did you have a nightmare, husband?" "Midnight." Li didn't expect that he would sleep for so long. The scenes that appeared in his dream, although trivial, were extremely real, as if he had experienced it himself. Perhaps it was really him who had experienced it himself. Suddenly, a strange sound came from the room. Li rubbed his stomach. Rui smiled and said, "I didn't wake you up for lunch in the afternoon. I'll go and heat up the food now." Seeing Rui walk out of the room, Li got off the bed, fetched a basin of ice water, and wiped his face carelessly. After being stimulated by the ice water, he immediately became much more awake. He let out a long sigh of relief. Just now he seemed to have experienced another life. Everything in the dream was so clear. When he thought about it, those scenes would appear in his mind again. "It's you, right?" Li murmured to the empty room. The room was eerily silent and no one answered. The food should have been heated in the pot a long time ago. Rui went out for a while and came back again with a steaming tray in her hand. She said, "It's very late. You can't eat too much. Just have some porridge, husband." The rice was ordinary porridge and the vegetables were pickled homemade pickles. Li picked up the bowl and ate with relish. He felt that tonight's porridge and pickles were better than all the delicacies he had eaten before. The pickles were also pickled with a unique recipe, but the recipe was not found in the library. When he was a child, he would run all over the mountains with his friends after lunch in the afternoon. The amount of exercise was huge, so when he returned home at night, he would become hungry again. At this time, Grandma would cook some simple white porridge with pickled vegetables. When the rice was ready and the heat on the Kong bed was almost done, Grandma would quickly finish the meal and crawl into the warm quilt. He hadn't eaten for a whole day, so a bowl of porridge was naturally not enough. At this time he didn't care about the rule that he couldn't eat too much at night. He took another bowl and soon saw the bottom of the bowl. "Husband, you can't eat any more." When Li reached out again, Rui stopped him in time. Although he felt that he could eat another bowl, Rui wouldn't let him, so Li had to give up. Rui put the bowl and chopsticks back. When she came back again, Li suddenly asked, "What do you think I should do?" Rui came over, smiled and said, "Husband, don't you already have the answer in your heart?" Hearing this, Li was stunned for a moment and then he also smiled. He raised his palm and looked at it, saying, "Well, I've received such a great favor from you, so I should help you dispel your obsession for so many years. After this you can go in peace." "What are you talking about, husband?" Rui looked at him in confusion. Li smiled and patted her hand, saying, "Nothing, nothing. Go to sleep. Women will become ugly if they stay up late." When he walked to the bedside, he saw that Rui was still standing in the same place, biting her lip and looking a little hesitant. This time it was Li Yi's turn to be confused. He should be the one struggling. Why was she hesitating? What's wrong? He walked over and asked her. "Husband." Rui suddenly looked up at him. Li looked into her eyes and waited for her to continue. "Let's consummate our marriage." The hesitation in her eyes quickly disappeared and turned into determination. Rui's voice came clearly. In Li Yi's mind, it was as if a bolt of lightning flashed, illuminating the whole world. At this moment, what Li family, what nobility, what young master, what going to the capital, all of you can go to hell. Chapter 296. Let's consummate our marriage. He had waited for this moment for a long time. At this moment, Li Yi had an urge to throw his head back and let out a long roar. Oh my God, she finally got over the hurdle in her heart. Li Yi abruptly carried the blushing Rui by her waist, and after spinning a few rounds on the spot, he went straight in the direction of the bed. Inside the room, the candlelight flickered. The two people on the bed had their foreheads against each other and their noses against each other. They could feel each other's breath. Li Yi could feel Rui's heartbeat speeding up. In fact, he wasn't much better. He had been a virgin for 2 lifetimes. Was he going to evolve into a real man tonight? "Husband," just as Li Yi's hand started to reach for his belt, Rui suddenly whispered. I seem to have forgotten something." Her voice was so soft that it could not be heard. "What is it?" Li Yi asked subconsciously. His hand had already reached for his belt, but he was not in the mood to listen to what she said next. Was this the time to talk about other things at a critical moment? "I think I had my period yesterday." Li Yi's hand stopped moving and his body froze. He slowly raised his head to look at her and asked in a trembling voice, "Are you serious?" Rui nodded. She buried her head in her chest and said, just now I forgot." When she said this, her voice was almost inaudible. It was not easy for her to muster the courage to take the last step, but she had forgotten the most important thing. Although she was still immature, Auntie Fang had already taught her about the matters between husband and wife after the wedding ceremony that day. When a woman was on her period, they could not consummate their marriage. She was already very thin-skinned, and after making such a big mistake, she no longer had the face to raise her head to look at Li Yi. "You can't play with me like this." Li Yi fell straight down, and all the hot blood in his body was instantly extinguished. The feeling of falling from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the valley was like riding a roller coaster. It was really King awesome. "Husband." Seeing that there was no sound from beside her, Rui thought that he was angry, so she raised her head and spoke softly. Before the last syllable could come out, her lips were sealed. Li Yi held her face and kissed her fiercely. He picked up the quilt and walked out. "Husband, where are you going?" Rui asked hurriedly. "Sleep in the kitchen." Li Yi said angrily and walked out with the quilt in his arms. Tonight it was better for him to calm down alone. Rui sat up from the bed and thought of what had just happened. Her face was so red that it looked like it was about to drip blood. His courage at that moment had long since disappeared without a trace. If he could turn back time, he probably wouldn't dare to say something like that again. "Miss, what happened to young master?" Xuanhuan held her little quilt, rubbed her sleepy eyes, walked in from the door and asked with a pout. She had been asleep for a long time, but was suddenly woken up by young master, who asked her to come to sleep with Miss, and then occupied her place. Closing the door, she walked to the bed and habitually climbed inside. She rolled the quilt into a tube and got in from the outside. She squinted at Rui and whispered, "Miss, you are so beautiful." After that, she slowly closed her eyes, and soon there was a sound of even breathing. Rui reached out to help her tuck the quilt, then bent her slender legs and leaned against the headboard, completely awake. She looked straight ahead, but her thoughts did not know where. The corners of her mouth occasionally raised a charming smile, and the blush rose from her neck to her ears. In the kitchen not far away, Li also couldn't sleep. Of course, one reason was that he had slept well during the day. The other reason was that he was hit by the cruel reality after being teased halfway. This night was destined to be extremely long for him. When he was thinking about it, he suddenly realized a serious problem. Before the appearance of the old man from the capital, there seemed to be another voice in his body, which had never happened before. Was it because the appearance of the old man had aroused the deep obsession of the original owner of the body? If the boy's consciousness was still affecting this body, and if he had really consummated with Rui just now, wouldn't it be equivalent to a wretched guy hiding and peeping at them when they were having sex? Thinking of this, his heart instantly became uncomfortable. Bastard. He fiercely punched the wall. Not long after, there came the sound of a cold breath in the dark room. "Young master, did you sleep well last night? I'll cook 2 eggs for you." Xuanhuan was in the yard, watching Li walk out of the kitchen with 2 panda eyes. She said doubtfully and took out 2 eggs from the storage room. Using boiled eggs to apply to the eyes could remove the dark circles. This was a special skill that the young master had taught her. Several of her close sisters used this method. When Li was washing his face in the yard, Rui walked to the door. When she saw him, she couldn't help but blush and retreat. She dipped the willow branch in the green salt and cleaned her teeth. She suddenly spat out some mouthwash. The morning sun shone through the mist, forming a rainbow of colors. The old man's hateful face appeared on the other side of the rainbow. "Young master." The old man with the surname Li wiped his face. He wasn't angry at all. This time when he called Li, he erased the word young from the front. The word young master was used to address the younger generation of the Li family. Although there was only one young master in his heart, he was used to calling him young master. After he returned, wouldn't he be demoted in front of the younger generation of the Li family? "When do we leave?" Li looked at him and asked. A hint of joy appeared on the old man's face and he said, "The sooner the better." Li waved his hand and said, "Then let's wait for another 7 days." Rui, who had just walked out of the room, blushed again. The old man revealed a bitter expression and said, "The journey is long and we don't know how long it will take. Young master, if we leave in 7 days, I'm afraid we won't be able to make it for the old madam's birthday." Li cursed in his heart and turned to walk back to his room. These people really knew how to pick the right time. They didn't come early or late. They just had to pick this crucial time. Weren't they deliberately causing trouble? "Young master, the eggs are ready. Come quickly." Xuanhuan came out of the kitchen with 2 boiled eggs in her hands. A moment later, Li was lying on a rocking chair with the servant girl standing behind him. She held 2 eggs in her hands and rolled them in front of his eyes. In the courtyard, the old man and the young man called Li Zheng were talking in a low voice. The latter would occasionally turn his head to look at the sword-wielding woman standing in the courtyard with a trace of fear in his eyes. This time, even if he was given a lot of courage, he wouldn't dare to say the words, "Second madam," again. Chapter 297. Young master, time is of the essence. Let's leave tomorrow morning. After discussing with the young man for a while, Elder Li walked over and said, "Tomorrow it is then." Li waved his hand. Since he couldn't leave in a few days, it didn't matter if it was tomorrow or the day after. He had to leave early and come back early. He still had business to attend to. "Okay, we will come pick you up tomorrow morning." After saying this, the old man left with the young man. They packed early and left the next morning. If the journey was smooth, they should be able to reach the capital in 5 days. "Son-in-law, where are you going?" Xuanhuan lowered her head to look at Li and asked in a small voice. Her tone was a bit nervous. Li patted her little hand and said, "Don't worry, I am only going to the capital to take care of some business. I will be back soon. At that time I will bring you rouge from the capital. Xuanhua's rouge and face powder can only be sold in the capital." Last time, Li Xian gave a few boxes of high-quality rouge. It was said that it was specially provided by the palace and was very precious. Only the Xuanhua in the capital sold it. The servant girl usually couldn't bear to use it and hid it in the cupboard. In the end, it was ruined by rats and she was sad for a long time. Li originally wanted to ask Li Xian for a few more boxes. Later, he found out that there weren't many in the manor. The last few boxes were all given to him last time. Xuanhuan nodded with some disappointment. Although she had wanted the rouge from the Wanhua for a long time, she hoped that in a few days during the Lantern Festival, the son-in-law would take her and the miss to see the lanterns. However, the son-in-law would leave tomorrow. No matter how beautiful the lanterns were, it would be meaningless. Whether it was to repay a favor or to seek peace of mind, no matter what the reason was, this trip to the capital was unavoidable. Even if Li Yi planned to return immediately after the old foreign's birthday, it would probably take at least half a month. In the days that he would not be in Qing'anfu, there were some things that he had to explain before he left. The first thing he had to do was, of course, to ask for leave from the county government. This was simple. Speaking of which, the sick leave that Her Highness had given him had not disappeared. Now that he was working while sick, his salary was doubled. He only needed to inform County Magistrate Liu, and he would take care of the rest. County Magistrate Liu had nothing to say to this county lieutenant who hardly appeared in the county government. Of course, he would not put Li Yi in the same position as the former county commandant Zhou. Not to mention that their backgrounds were worlds apart, he could not find any fault with county commandant Zhou's contributions to the yamen. These days, under the instruction of the magistrate of Qing and Prefecture, the county magistrate of Qing and Prefecture had sent the county lieutenants to Anxi County, while the county magistrate of Anxi County had personally come to Anxi County to inspect the working style of the Anxi County government. Before he left, he intentionally left a few bailiffs to stay in the Anxi County government to learn about the reform. The good public security of Anxi County was widely publicized as an example. County Magistrate Liu had been an official for many years, but this was the first time he felt so proud. Li Yi walked out of the county government and went straight to the theater. He also had to inform Wan Ruoqing and Old Man Sun that they had to stop the expansion of the theater for the time being. They had to manage the current territory first. If the foundation was not stable, there was a high chance that the theater would collapse in the future. Don't worry, sir. With our current manpower, running the few theaters in and out of the city is already our limit. There are many people who want to join us, but they are only doing odd jobs to earn a living. A few stewards are currently training their own people. When they are capable enough, they will be sent out. Old Sun's saliva flew everywhere. With a face full of excitement, he painted a grand blueprint for Li Yi with just a few words. It seemed that he wanted to open theaters in all the prefectures of the Jing Kingdom in his lifetime. Everyone was busy. Even Wu Heir, who had just joined the theater, was no exception. The eldest son of the Wu family continued his business of escorting goods and transporting goods. At the same time, he collected information from all walks of the martial arts world. Anecdotes about the martial arts world and the ranking of the best had been completely handed over to Wu Heir. The few storytellers under him used the fastest speed to weave the martial arts world's matters into all sorts of stories. The ranking of the Wulin heroes changed 3 times a day. Its influence was no longer limited to Qing and Prefecture. It was quite well known in the neighboring prefectures. Wan Ruoqing was still so beautiful and charming, but she had become a lot thinner. Li Yi frowned and said, "As for the theater, just let the people under you handle it. You just need to control the overall situation and avoid any big mistakes. Don't work too hard." Li Yi's original intention was to let them use their own abilities to change their poor lives. He didn't expect that the small brothel at the beginning would develop into such a huge organization. Wan Ruoqing's body was already weak. If she collapsed, it would not be worth it. Got it. Wan Ruoqing smiled and nodded. It was beyond her expectations that the theater could reach the scale it was today. Step by step, they had all put in a lot of effort for it. Naturally, they treasured it very much. They handled all the big and small things personally. More importantly, she really wanted to make some achievements and show him. That's right. Sister Ruoqing gets up before dawn every day and doesn't go to sleep after midnight. She has lost a lot of weight these days. The girl named Xiao Zhu said indignantly. Li Yi patted her on the shoulder and said, "From now on, you are Sister Ruoqing's personal butler. Your monthly salary is the same as the other butlers. The only thing you need to do is to look after her and not let her work too hard. Do you understand?" "Yes." The young girl's face flushed red as she patted her small chest and promised, "Don't worry, I will definitely raise Sister Ruoqing until she is fair and plump, just like before. No, she was too thin before, she has to be a little fatter." Li Yi smiled and then looked at them and said, "I have to go out for a period of time. If there is anything, you two can discuss it. If there is any trouble that you can't solve, go to the county government to find Arrestor Liu." When passing by the gate of the Jade Courtyard, Li Yi stopped for a moment. When he was hesitating whether to go in and say goodbye, the girl standing at the gate welcomed him with a smile. "Child, do you want to come in and have some fun?" Looking at the girl talking and the white powder on her face falling down, Li no longer hesitated and strode away. He was only going out for half a month. There was no need to say goodbye. He had asked xiaotsui to send the things over. At most, when he came back, he would treat her to a meal and apologize in person. It should be sincere enough, right? When he stepped into the house, Rui was helping him pack up. There was a bulging bag on the table and she was putting a few silver ingots into another small bag. "These." Li pointed at the bag. Rui explained, "They are all clothes to change. It is not convenient to use the silver notes. It is a long journey. Husband, bring more silver. It is old madam's birthday. You should buy some decent gifts. Don't be laughed at. By the way, it is inconvenient for me. Let Rui go to the capital with you. I don't know what will happen on the way. With Rui she can protect you." Li Yi stood rooted to the spot in a daze as he watched her tidy up and ramble on. She was a peerless expert of her generation, yet she was behaving like a little lady. At this moment, the scene was really like a wife talking about her husband before he went away. It was also a feeling that Li Yi had never experienced in his 2 lives. The first time he saw the woman who smashed the wooden table with her palm and said, "I am Lu Rui," it was as if it was yesterday. He didn't know when she started to become more and more like a little wife. Chapter 298. You really don't want to go with me? Li Yi still wanted to fight for it. Now that the 2 of them had just broken through the last layer of window paper, it was time for them to be lovey-dovey and lovey-dovey. When they reached the capital and counted the days, it should be time. If he went with Rui, he wouldn't have to rush back so quickly. It was not easy to have a life with just the 2 of them. After arriving at the capital, they could go sightseeing and make up for their honeymoon. What a perfect plan. However, no matter how perfect the plan was, it couldn't win against his damn aunt. This was definitely one of the 2 words that men hated the most since ancient times. It didn't seem to be called like this in the modern times. In short, as long as it was a woman, even if she was an invincible martial arts master, when faced with this word, she would be defeated. Therefore, the target of the honeymoon became Mississippi Lu. Li Yi was suddenly filled with worry about this journey. Lu Rui smiled and said, "This journey is long and it's not convenient for me to go. You know, husband, the capital is not like Qing'an Prefecture. Rui is naughty and mischievous. Husband, keep an eye on her and don't let her get into any trouble." No one knew a younger sister better than an older sister. Li Yi felt that the one who understood Lu Rui the most was Rui. Just based on that sentence of "don't let her get into any trouble" instead of "don't let her be wronged or bullied," who's naughty and mischievous? When did I get into trouble? A dissatisfied voice came from outside. Lu Rui walked in with a frown. She was very dissatisfied with Rui's evaluation of her just now. "No one said you're naughty and mischievous. Mississippi Lu is gentle and generous, virtuous and good at home. You're the model of all women in the world." That sentence made Mississippi Lu blush slightly. Just as she was about to draw her sword to thank Li Yi for his praise, Li Yi, who saw that the situation was not good, quickly slipped out. His voice came from outside the door. "We're leaving tomorrow morning. Remember to pack your luggage tonight." Putting aside her character of fighting at the slightest disagreement, second Miss Lu was really a must-have artifact for home travel. She could be admired from afar to cultivate one's mind, and she could also be used as a personal bodyguard. Along the way, it was inevitable that they would have to travel through mountains and rivers. If they encountered bandits with their half-baked martial arts skills, they might not be able to handle them. As for the 2 old men, Li Yi had never placed his hopes on them. At the critical moment, his sister-in-law was still the most reliable. Seeing Xuanhuan sitting alone in the courtyard in a daze, he had long gotten used to her nagging. Suddenly realizing that he hadn't heard her voice for more than half a month, he still felt a little uncomfortable. He slowed down his footsteps and quietly approached her from behind. Suddenly, he reached out and covered her eyes. "Ah!" The servant girl let out a cry of surprise. After she came back to her senses, she removed Li Yi's hands and pouted in dissatisfaction. "Young master, you scared me again." She didn't need to look back to know who the person behind her was. The only person in the family who would play such a boring game with her was the young master. "Let's go." Li Yi rubbed her head and said. "Where are we going?" The servant girl raised her head and asked. "I'll take you out for a walk." Okay. Young master, wait for me. I'll come out after I change my clothes." The servant girl hurriedly stood up and ran to the room as she spoke. "Sister, do you really want me to go to the capital with you?" In the room, Lu Rui looked at Rui and asked. "What? You don't want to go?" Rui said as she packed her luggage, then let Uncle Fong go. Uncle Fong talked to me about this morning. He said that he had nothing to do at home and wanted to go to the capital to have a look. Since sister wants me to go, then I'll reluctantly agree to protect him. Lu Rui pursed his lips and made an expression that said, I don't want to go. If it wasn't for you I would never agree. He quickly slipped out of the room. I'll go back to my room to pack. If she left late and her sister changed her mind and let Uncle Fong go, she wouldn't have a place to regret it. She was born here, grew up here and had never left Qingyan Prefecture. She had long wanted to see the outside world. How could she give this opportunity to someone else? Early in the morning he crawled out of his warm bed. When Rui brought a hot towel for him to wipe his face, she told him that the old man had been waiting outside for a while. Yesterday he had accompanied Xuanhuan to shop until night time. Looking at the sky, it was getting late. He carelessly wiped his face and quickly put on his clothes. Walking out of the room, he was slightly stunned when he saw the situation in the courtyard. Including the old man and the young man he saw last time, there were 7 or 8 figures in the courtyard. They were dressed the same and looked familiar. Young master, we should leave. The old man walked over and said with a smile. There's no hurry. Let's leave after eating. Li waved his hand. The old man could only nod in agreement. The meal before leaving was always especially sumptuous. When he invited the old man, he was rejected. He was not used to having so many people watching him eat together, so he sent them all out. During the meal, Rui gave many instructions. The young servant girl's face was full of reluctance. She didn't eat much of her favorite dishes. On the other hand, Mississippi Lu seemed to be in a good mood. She seemed to be looking forward to the trip this time. Li felt that Rui told him to keep an eye on Rui and not let her get into trouble was not easy to achieve. The way this lady did things was never something he could control. He raised his head and said, Why don't I go alone? Or can I bring Fong? Crack. The chopsticks in Mississippi Lu's hand broke into several pieces. She looked at Li and her lips curled into a meaningful smile. Ahem, forget it. Let's do as we said before. Li buried his head in his meal and didn't mention what he had just said. Young master, is the young madam not going back with us? A rather luxurious carriage stopped outside the house. The Li old man looked at Li and asked in confusion. Li got on the carriage and said, The madam is not well. I can go alone. The madam is not well? The old man was stunned for a moment. Then a trace of joy appeared on his face. If that was the case, it was indeed not suitable for her to be tormented. After a year and a half he could bring both mother and son over. That would be a joyous occasion for the house. There were also 11 guards accompanying them. It was said that there should have been 14 guards, but because one of them was injured, 2 were left behind to take care of him. After a few days they would return on their own. Lu Rui didn't sit in the carriage. She rode a horse and walked in front. Li opened the curtain and waved goodbye to the people standing at the door. His line of sight was fixed on the door. He watched as the figure at the front of the carriage turned from clear to blurry. Beside her, there was a small figure waving his hand non-stop until the carriage turned a corner and he could no longer see it. Chapter 299. The carriage drove out of the city gate and headed east along the official road. The stable carriage gradually became bumpy. The so-called official road was actually just a slightly flat dirt road. It was far from the asphalt road or even cement road of the future. The carriage did not have any shock-absorbing properties. It was fine if the distance was short, but sitting in the carriage for a few hours was no different from riding a motorcycle on the village road of the future. Li had not felt this kind of torture in a long time. He let out a long sigh. If it wasn't for this, he should be flying with Rui and going on a sweet honeymoon. They should be looking at the mountains, the water, the flowers, the stars and the moon. He wouldn't be lying in the carriage alone or the 2 of them. The curtain of the carriage was lifted and fresh air with a light fragrance rushed in. Li made some space for Mississippi Lu. Bored to death, he looked through the gap in the curtain and threw a broad bean into his mouth while looking at the road that kept going backwards. Although riding for a few hours was a piece of cake for Mississippi Lu, it had long lost its initial novelty. She was in a deadlock with Li over the last few broad beans in the bag. Until Li threw in a broad bean with his own saliva in exchange for a fierce eye roll from Mississippi Lu, he finally won. After a few hours of traveling, everyone must be tired. Why don't we rest for a while? Li moved to the front of the carriage, lifted the curtain, and said to the people outside. Old Man Li stuck his head out from a smaller carriage in the back and said, Young master, it's getting late. In less than an hour we'll arrive at the next county. Once we get there we'll first find an inn to stay at and then set off tomorrow morning. Li nodded and climbed back into the carriage. He secretly rejoiced that the distance between Qing and Prefecture and the capital was not too far. 6 or 7 days compared to a journey that could easily take months, was considered very short. However, thinking that this kind of jolting would continue for a week, he couldn't help but feel a headache. In the small courtyard the sun was about to set. The young maidservant was lying on the rocking chair that Li often rested on. She was counting something with her fingers. Half a month is 15 days. Son-in-law and second young mistress have been gone for half a day. In another 14.5 days we will see them again, Xuanhuan. Rui's voice came from inside the house. Hearing her mistress's voice, the servant girl responded with a ah. Wash your hands and come back for dinner. I'll be back soon. She got up from the rocking chair and glanced out the door. When she saw Uncle Fong pass by, she turned around and walked back into the room listlessly. At the same time, Fong and a few other men had just walked out of the house. Fong, are you sure they won't come back before midnight? A man asked with uncertainty. Don't worry. Fong patted his chest and said, the women have gone to the temple to pray. They won't come back until after midnight. As long as we come back before midnight, there won't be any problems. That's good. I heard that the competition for the courtesan belle these days will be very exciting. It's not easy to wait until my wife is not at home. This time we have to take a good look. The few men laughed in tacit understanding. Once they were on the street they immediately dispersed. I'll go to Ingchun house to have a look. Fong, are you going to Jadeite courtyard to see Miss Hong? When only Fong and another man were left, the other man patted Fong's shoulder and left with a big smile. Old Fong cursed under his breath and walked in the opposite direction. At this time in Jadeite courtyard the madam was hiding in the room, smiling happily. She was obviously in a good mood. It was a wise decision to invest all the resources on Qin Miao Miao. She was already a little famous and in the past few days she had earned a lot of attention. In addition, she had also worked hard to win the support of many young masters. Her popularity was comparable to those veteran courtesans. This year she might be able to get one of the top 10 courtesans. The only pity was that drunken Mo seemed to be possessed by something. No matter what she said, she was not willing to compete for the position of courtesan belle. If she had such a thought, her ranking would definitely be higher than Qin Miao Miao's. She had been in this industry for a lifetime and had seen all kinds of temperaments. Someone like drunken Mo would suffer sooner or later. If she didn't take advantage of her young years to work hard and plan for the future, she might be able to end up in a good family. Someone like her who acted recklessly would most likely end up in a miserable end. There was a knock on the door. The madam withdrew her thoughts and opened the door. Seeing who it was she asked, drunken Mo, what's the matter? If it was in the past, the madam would naturally not be so cold to the star of Jadeite courtyard, her money tree. But now the money tree had changed hands, so she naturally did not need to be so enthusiastic. Mother, aren't you going to invite me in? Sung Zumo seemed to be completely unaware of this and still said with a smile. I say, drunken Mo, listen to mother's advice. This will only destroy you in the end. Even if you don't think for mother, you have to think for yourself. If this goes on, mother really can't help you. No matter what, it was a relationship of many years, and the madam still did not give up trying to persuade her. Zheng Zumo smiled and said, that's why I came this time. You've thought it through? The madam's eyes lit up. Yes. Zheng Zumo nodded and said, I'm here to redeem myself. Where did you get so much money? Looking at the stack of banknotes in her hand, the madam asked in shock after verifying their authenticity. The banknotes were real. As long as she went to the corresponding bank, she could exchange them for the equivalent amount of silver. The problem was, where did she get so much money? This money should be enough, right? Zheng Zumo looked at her and asked. Enough. The madam nodded mechanically. According to the reputation, everyone in the Jadeite courtyard had a clear price for their redemption. No matter who it was, as long as they had enough money, she would let them go. Of course, she would not easily let go of drunken Mo in the past. But now, her reputation was not as good as before. After the top beauty competition, she was afraid that her reputation would drop a lot, and the money needed to redeem herself would naturally be less, at least far less than what she had in her hands. She was a little hesitant at this moment. What if drunken Mo? As soon as this idea came up, she rejected it. It was a foregone conclusion that Qin Miao Miao would replace her as the new face of Jadeite courtyard. There would be no more changes. Drunken Mo's usefulness to her was actually dispensable. It was better to accept the silver and do her a favor. Have you really thought it through? The madam looked at her and asked seriously. Obviously, she had made her choice at this time. After getting Tseng Zimo's confirmation, the madam sighed and took out her contract from the box in the room. She said, "For the sake of our past friendship, if you want to leave, wait until after the courtesan competition." Although her fame was not as good as before, she was still stronger than most people. At this critical time, there was no harm in gaining more popularity for Jadeite Courtyard. It was just a few days later. She had waited for so many years. A few more days was nothing. Moreover, the contract was in her hands. The moment she got it, she was already free. When she walked out of the madam's room, Tseng Zimo felt unprecedentedly relaxed. She finally unloaded the mountain that had been pressing on her shoulders for a long time. She let out a long sigh of relief and walked all the way back to her room. It was as if she did not see the various complicated looks from her sisters in the past. She ignored Chen Miao's gloating look. She pushed open the door and walked in. She saw Xiao Chui sitting by the bed with a sad face. "This silly girl," she murmured. She had wanted to give her a surprise, but since she had promised her mother to keep it a secret, she could only tell her the news after the courtesan competition. You're tuning in to the Sword Dance in the Vast Sky YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.